Feel, the podcast where we give you the science behind everyday topics. I'm your friend Sachi Kaur, and I'm here with my partner,
Tisha King.
and we both are neuroscientists, and we love to talk about the things that help us grow.
So today, if you are interested in different topics and don't want to do the research about it, we're here to do the research for you. And today, what we're going to talk about are red and green flags in the workplace.
So, before we actually dive into the topic, it's time for Tisha's Science in the News.
Yes, exciting. So today, we're going to talk about an artificial womb experiment that has been going on. It actually started in 2017 at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And so what they actually did, they had a bunch of experiments where they had these lambs and they had set up artificial wombs for them to develop over the course of time. So what's exciting now is that in 2023, they're starting to do these experiments in humans. And what they're hoping to do is not to start from gestation, or conception, but the idea is to help with babies that are born premature. So they'll put these babies into the same kind of artificial womb and then allow them to develop to full term, so the 40 weeks.
That is so interesting, but also so insane to think about at the same time.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of out of this world or like really futuristic. It feels like you wouldn't think that babies would start being said that they were born out of a bag.
Right. And what I'm most interested in is this artificial womb going to change any of, their genetics in any way? Is it going to affect the neurological cycles? Is it going to affect like all those things, which of course makes you think, and it's so scary to think of. It's like it's artificial. It's not a natural
Right.
womb. You're not going to get the nutrients that you actually get from a mother's womb, which we know that the mother and the child has this like connection through the placenta, and everything's kind of going back and forth in between them. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see what the parents and things will think about it. Like who will be the parents that will be willing to give up their children to test this type of science. But I guess you have to be in a dire situation where you can't go to full term and this is kind of like the last resort. That's what I'm thinking. I just couldn't imagine parents being like, yeah, just take my baby and I'll see you in a few weeks.
Right. Yeah, I think we'll have to have some strict rules on who can get it done and who cannot, and how the whole situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I'm assuming they're very much in the early stages of testing this. So
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like they're just starting to think that this is something that could be possible in humans. So I think it is still very, very early on. It doesn't seem like they've actually tested it out on anyone yet.
well, interesting. Let's see where this goes. Now, let us dive into our topic for this episode, which is red flags and green flags in the workplace. So, Tisha and I want to start with talking about what we feel are the green flags or the red flags in the workplace. So, let us start with the positive, the green flags in the workplace. So, Tisha, do you want to start us off telling what do you think is a green flag in the workplace for you?
One big green flag for me is not being micromanaged. So I really like to work independently most of the time and not have someone just standing over my shoulder and being like overbearing and everything. So that is one of the biggest things I think I look for now, especially after going through grad school and everything, and you pretty much just making your own schedule. I just don't think I could go back to being told every second of the day what I need to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I am totally with you on that. I just hate being micromanaged, and it's literally you feel like you're back in, middle school again, where the teacher has to check everything. They have to get in, or are you late? You're going to be fined if you're a little late. All those things. I'm like, come
Right.
on, we're all adults. We can actually do what
Right.
we do.
Right. I'm
Otherwise,
responsible. I can do this on my own.
otherwise we know we'll lose our job if I don't perform.
Right.
I don't work. So like, why is there a need to micromanage? And
Right.
that is That is such a great thing that you can kind of have your own schedule, work based on however you want to work. And there are so many horrendous stories when it comes to micromanaging, because I recently heard, one of my friends actually told me, so her boss every Thursday,
Mm-hmm.
because they're all working remote. And I kind of get, yes, it can be sometimes difficult to manage when everybody's working remotely, but going to extremes of like having a 4 hour call, 4 hours call where everybody's working together on their Zoom screens, and every half an hour the boss is like, "Oh, is anybody having any problems?" That
Oh
is
my gosh, that would be so annoying.
that is so annoying. And every week you have to do it for 4 freaking hours. That's a lot. That's a
I
lot.
would feel like the boss isn't, yeah, it seems like the boss wouldn't be getting any work done in the 4 hours if they're just watching everybody else and like clocking the time for every 30 minutes. You can't be being that productive if your mind is on what everyone else is doing.
Exactly. I don't think so. It's not the best strategy for sure. Come up with something else,
Yeah.
but not this.
So Sachi, what are your green flags or one of your green flags?
I think one of my biggest green flags is, well, I hadn't actually known much of a difference between fitting in and belonging. I think if you can belong somewhere, that just gives you so much fulfillment versus fitting
Mm-hmm.
in. Well, I want to actually talk about what fitting in versus belonging means, which I did get from Brené's Brown TED Talk on vulnerability. So she's talking about
Mm-hmm.
fitting in, where it's mostly like the culture is built and you're just trying to see like, how do I, the way they speak, how do I kind of get to that place the way they speak? Everybody, let's say in the workplace, there's a lingo sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
that's just an example,
Right.
right? So how do I kind of fit in? And I think a million times you have to think before saying anything, before giving your ideas, before raising any concerns, before
Mm-hmm.
opinions, and just trying to fit in the culture and the way people talk and the way people are, you know that's fitting in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas belonging is, this is who I am, this is how I am, and this is how I raise my opinions and ideas and everything that I have to say. And whenever I think you belong in a place, you just be you. You can be you.
Mm-hmm.
Is, I think everybody gives you that space to be you. And I have been in both positions where I was at a job where I was just trying to fit in, versus now where I'm in a
Mm-hmm.
job where I do feel that I belong. I don't have to think a million times
Yes.
before saying anything, which is very
Yeah.
liberating if you think about it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Belonging is more natural. You don't really have to try to do it. It's you being yourself and you feel comfortable in that space. Whereas if you're fitting, it's like more forced and uncomfortable and don't really want to be there or work in that environment. You kind of, like I said, force yourself to get along with people, make conversations, and it's like wants to do that when you've been in so much time at work.
Exactly. And that's what I think about. I'm like, half of my day, or maybe a little more than half of my day is, I mean, I'm spending at work. So I have to really like it. I have to kind of gel with the people that are there, and I have to feel like I'm not miserable working here where I can't even say what I want to say when I want to say it, and
Hmm.
all these things. Although I do remember going back to emotional intelligence, that sometimes you do need to think about, like, do I need to say it? Well, do I need to say it? Do I need to say it now? Does it actually have to be said by me?
Hmm.
I think these kind of three things are important in general, but just being able to say what you want to say without too many filters on, I feel is very important.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because I mean, you already have to think to do your job. You don't want to have to think about every word that's coming out of your mouth just to make other people comfortable in the space that everyone is sharing.
Exactly. I totally
Yeah.
agree with that. Totally agree with that. Okay, so throughout this conversation, we're going to be talking about red flags and green flags, and especially if you're looking for another job or you're trying to evaluate what green flags or red flags your workplace has, please watch out for these.
Yeah, so we want to start off with clear communication. So obviously, it's important that everybody in the company, like we're saying, feels comfortable to communicate and talk back and forth with each other, say when there are issues, if things arise, things like that. And Sasha, do you have any particular examples of when communication was really important in your job or any horrible stories about communication?
Oh, yes, I do have a horror story about communication. Sometimes you need to have those horror stories so that you know the importance of clear communication. And one of the biggest things that happened with me was that the place I worked at before, uh, so when I got the job offer, well, I accepted the job offer, but it wasn't until my very first day that I wasn't told that my boss was going to be fully remote, while I had to come into work every single day. That was
Hmm.
one thing. That's one red flag. Second red flag happened when because I think after you're in grad school and like you said, we've become so independent with our schedules and we are
Yeah.
and we can get our stuff done. So when I talked about flexible work policy, my boss says, "Oh no, we actually don't have much flexible work policy. You have to come in regardless," while she was fully remote. All right.
Hmm.
Then I was like, okay, I think this is something that I need to speak to HR, because when I was hired, they did say that, oh, yes, you can take one day work from home, whichever day you want to, and that's how we'll make it work. I was pretty okay.
Hmm.
Then when I spoke to HR, she's like, oh, yes, in our handbook, we do have flexible work policy, but it kind of depends a little bit on the manager.
Hmm.
So I was like, and my manager says we don't have flexible work policy. So I,
Right.
why is there such a big disconnect when it comes to communication and what we have, what we allow, what we don't allow in managers and the execs? Like, it's
Hmm.
crazy to me. And I'm like, how do you
Yeah.
guys not know all this? Is it because she was fully remote? I'm like, I
It
don't.
seems it seems like she just didn't want to know, like she just wasn't making herself aware of it or didn't want other people to have the ability to be flexible with their schedule.
Exactly. I think that was pretty much it. So that's why it's so important to have a good boss. It's so important to have somebody who understands things and is very clear with communicating, what is, what isn't. And also just the fact when somebody is offering you a job and they don't tell you that, oh, your boss is going to be fully remote. And you get to know all
Hmm.
of these like little nuances on the very first day of your job. It's just insane to me. I think transparency when you are offered a job is so so important.
Yeah, and especially in that case where they told you the opposite, kind of. I
Yeah,
guess they told you the exact opposite of what was the reality of your job. So that makes it even more confusing.
it does, and sometimes then you don't know like what do I expect, and in hindsight, if you really think about it, it's like what can I really expect from them even in the future?
Hmm. They will
If
probably
the
do the same
beginning,
thing again.
right, if the beginning was that bad, how is it gonna really go in the future? So I think that's
Right, right.
big red flag, not being completely transparent about what the work arrangement's going to look like.
Hmm. So one other really cool thing that we found about communication, Google actually did this study called Project Aristotle. And basically what they did a survey of a lot of the employees and different groups that they have working at Google to figure out what aspects or dynamics of their groups help improve the communication that the groups have. And so some of the things that they pointed out were psychological safety, so feeling comfortable to take risks within the group and being so that when you make a suggestion, people aren't going to embarrass you if you're right or wrong, depending on whatever it is that you say. Being a dependable person, have structure and clarity, so knowing what to expect, having meaning, so knowing the purpose of what you're doing, and also the impact. So the impact that you're making towards the bigger goals of the overall team. And they found that all of these things were really important in making sure that the group has really good communication and is able to meet their goals effectively.
That's pretty exciting to me. And also what was startling was when I looked at these numbers that Fortune 500 companies lose $31.5 billion a year because of poor communication in the workplace. So I mean, what's a bigger indicative of having clear communication when you look at numbers like you're losing so much money just because you don't have it?
That also reminds me of another thing that we saw with the turnover rates. So this is kind of a red flag if your job has high turnover rates where people are constantly leaving and coming and leaving and coming. Companies also lose a lot of money when people quit and then they have to put forth efforts towards recruitment, and that costs them almost about, I think, half as much as the salary that they were paying the person that originally had the job.
Oh, really?
So yeah, so they lose a lot of money as far as putting efforts towards recruitment. But another thing that was really interesting as well is that companies like Google, like these top companies, they have really high turnover rates, well, higher than you would expect. So there's a lot of people who stayed there for like a year and a half. I think it was like 1.3 years for Google. And then after that, they're likely to leave and move on to something else. And then they hire somebody else to fill that position.
But
So
that's
I don't know if it's a really good or a bad thing, but it seems interesting to say the least.
Yeah, that is actually pretty interesting. I would like to see like why that is really. Like Google's a great place to work at. At least that's what we know. Uh,
Yeah,
but having a high turnover rate, yeah, I'm not very sure of that. But I do get the fact that, of course, companies have to give in a lot of resources in order to find a new person. So,
right. Yeah. And especially if it's unexpected, like you weren't expecting to have to put out ads or, put forth those efforts to find a really good person that fills that role.
correct.
But I'm sure it's probably more extreme for smaller companies, whereas Google is so big, everybody would love the opportunity to work at Google.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
I can't imagine them, really having so much trouble to find new
Some
employees.
I know. I think sometimes what could possibly be a reason is like not the company as a whole, but bad managers,
Mm,
just
mhm.
bad teams, just people who kind of don't get
Yeah,
along. Just I think knowing the fact how many people like Google has, working, I'm pretty sure that there are some rotten apples in there who kind of
yeah.
don't get along. And that's why people have to leave and kind of hop on to other opportunities. Or I think once you've also worked on Google, probably people get like higher packages somewhere else. And if they were at Google, they
Mhm,
probably
mhm.
have to wait maybe 2 or 3 years to get that promotion or whatever the
Right.
situation is. But if you go to another company, you're getting a raise, you're getting a better title. And then you're like, once I'm done from there, maybe I'll just come back to Google whenever.
Yeah, that's one thing that they did mention as well, that they tried to spin it into a green flag by saying that these people are going on to get better jobs, they're making more money. So why wouldn't we be happy that we have a high turnover rate because they're going on and living better lives? But in some aspects, other people would think that was a bad thing.
I think it's like either or, just depends on the situation.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And I think, of course, one of the things about clear communication is yes, you can have great communication, but then your leadership should also be very supportive of all of the things. That if you take concerns to them, you are assured that something is going to be done about the concerns that you take to them. And it's been seen by
Yes.
Harvard Business Review that employees who feel like they have a supportive supervisor or supportive leadership, they're 1.3 times more likely to stay with their current organization, which is good for retention, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to feel supported in your role, or why would you want to do work for the company?
Exactly. And I mean, I think, well, we are on Zoom recording this, and the example kind of comes from Zoom. So I think Eric Yuan, who is the CEO of Zoom, he gained a lot of attention for his leadership, especially during the rapid growth of Zoom, especially during COVID. Everybody was on Zoom and using this platform. So I think that
Hmm.
was the
Hmm.
time that he was like, I want to retain all these employees who are working for the company, who are very, very important part of the company. And he kind of supported just, the mental health of his employees, having this flexible work schedule and just, doing however they felt they work the best, and even the timings as well. Some people are night owls, some people are early birds. So
Yeah.
just giving them the flexibility to kind of work based on what were their most productive times is what kind of gathered him a lot of attention at the time, which I
Hmm.
think is pretty great. I mean, oh, I would be so
Yeah.
if that was the case, that I didn't have to wake up in the morning and such a night owl.
Exactly. That kind of ties also into work-life balance. So having, a clear separation between this is work time and this is my lifetime where I can go and do whatever I want.
Mhm.
And another quick example, I've obviously done a really deep dive into Google and all of its workers. They offer Googlers, the people who work at Google, they have access to free meals, gyms, video games, net pods, mini golfs. I think they have like slides and stuff there. So they do try to make an environment where it's, you are there to work, but you can have some fun along the day while you're there. And they give them a substantial amount of time for lunch and things like that.
That's actually pretty cool. Like having all those freebies, who doesn't want it? I know a lot of people like want to work for Google because of the freebies as well. And also, I've heard people say that the lunches there are just like so awesome.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, that they have a lot of like Indian kitchens kind of thing.
Mm.
Because a lot of
Mm.
Indians work at, all these big tech companies.
Right.
I'm not a techie. I wish I was. Then maybe I would co-work for Google. But
Yeah. It seems
here's
like a fun place to be.
yeah, it does sound like a great place to be at. And I think one of the other big things is having diversity and inclusion
Hmm.
in the culture. Because I think it kind of you can go back to just this fitting in versus belonging kind of thing. I feel like if you have more diversity and inclusion in the culture, you would feel more safe because you'll be able to make many stronger bonds with people who have maybe similar experiences like you.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think even engaging with people who don't have so many similar experiences like you, but the fact that they will accept you for who you are,
Hmm.
environment, I feel it's just so, so important.
Yeah. At least being willing to listen and understand or try to understand where someone else is coming from if you don't have that exact same experience is
Mhm.
definitely really important.
Yeah, that sure is. And that's why we have another example of Microsoft and many other tech companies were actually facing this challenge related to diversity, where in 2014, 71% of its workforce was male and 60% of them were white. So there weren't many women specifically
Mm-hmm.
in the tech companies. And by 2020, the representation of women had increased to about 28.6%. And now they also have a lot of underrepresented minorities, which are about 20.3% in the US workforce, which is pretty great.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes, definitely. I always go back and forth with this idea of purposely hiring people from minority backgrounds. I'm never sure if it's like a good thing. A lot of jobs will purposely put postings that will they have like a DEI hire or diversity inclusion hire. And so I'm never sure if this is like, I mean, it's good that the company is diversifying and, having a broader spectrum of the type of people that are at the company, but then I'm not sure, like, this seems kind of weird to put it out there like that
I agree with
to
you.
me. Yeah. I'm just like, oh, this is a good thing, but it just comes off very awkward.
It does. And I remember, well, I was working with my previous job, I had to deal with like a lot of professors there. And and I was in touch with some of them very closely. So some of them literally told me that Sachi, I truly feel like I was just a diversity hire. I don't
Hmm.
feel I get all of the perks like any other
Hmm.
person, any other professor would. I don't feel I have enough say in the things I do and the research I do here. And I just feel I am a diversity hire, which is heartbreaking to hear, and it is so tough to go through. And then I have
Hmm.
also heard some of the people saying that I do not want my tenure to be renewed
Mm. They
because of.
want to leave because of that issue.
I mean, who wouldn't? You wouldn't
Right.
want to feel like a charity case. You want to get the job based on your merit, based on your education, based on all of the things that you have to offer. And if somebody
Hmm.
or someplace doesn't identify that, that's a toxic place to be at.
Right, exactly. It shouldn't be that you have to go out of your way to hire people of a specific group or demographic. It should
Right?
just naturally happen.
It should definitely naturally happen, but also I think it's important to be like mindful. The hiring team should be very mindful when they are looking at different candidates for different jobs, and definitely having like this DEI hire thing like on the job post is just such a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like I said before, I'm so conflicted with that. I don't know if it's best to know upfront that you are the DEI hire or to get hired and then feel like later on like they hired me because I'm in this particular group.
Mhm.
It's just I think it's just overall a very awkward conversation to have.
It is very awkward for sure, but then I also feel like why should that even be the case? Why can't we
Hmm.
have inclusive environments that nobody really ever feels that I was a DEI hire?
Right, right.
Like,
That I mean, that is the magic question.
yeah, I mean, we have a long way to go to have such inclusive environments where nobody really feels like, oh, they might have hired me because of diversity.
Right, right.
It's a hard place to get to, but I think we hopefully
It's
will.
possible. It's possible.
When Tisha, you and I become CEOs of different companies, we're gonna make sure the environment is like.
Yes, we have to keep that in mind always.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so one other red flag that I wanted to mention, this one is a bit different as well. So that it's the idea that say if you're working at a job and you have all of these responsibilities, but they give you the title of like a coordinator, but you're doing the job of a director, and they're reluctant to switch your title from one to the other, which would be like a increase in maybe pay or status. Director just sounds like, much more prestigious than if you're just a coordinator.
I
So I think that's a red flag if the company is reluctant to give you the boost that you need when you're doing all of the work that qualifies under what would be considered a higher status at your job.
I totally agree with that. And I've also seen sometimes like what happens is a company kind of lays off somebody, let's say, or
Hmm.
somebody left their position, and now all of that work is kind of under your umbrella. It's now on
Right,
your plate. And now they're not ready to hire somebody for the position that's vacant. And they're okay
right.
with the fact that you're dealing with like all of these extra things on your plate. And they're like, well, if that person can actually do it, then why hire somebody else?
Right. But you're doing the work of two jobs now.
Yes. And you're putting in the extra hours as well. Talking about extra hours, what kills me sometimes is, well, this is also a story from my last job. I feel like I'm literally opening a can of worms, but I guess it's um, but what happened was one of the times, like, since my boss was like, oh no, we don't actually have flex work policy or whatever,
Hmm.
I had to be there like much earlier than my actual time. Let's say if I start my work at 9, I had to be there like by 8 because we had some important meeting and I had to get some things done. And then the next day I was just a little chill, and I was like, instead of 8:30 I'll reach 8:45, and and then
Hmm.
my boss was up my case about it, and And she was like, why were you 15 minutes late? I'm like, because yesterday I actually came in an hour early. And she's like, oh, like in this full-time employment job, you don't get this flex work if you came in like early, then you can
Mm-hmm.
come in late today. I'm like, what?
Like, what is this?
I mean, the things that she said to me sounded so insane and sounded so out of logic. And I'm like, how does this even make sense? How do people
Yeah.
even work here with this kind of stuff if that's what every boss is doing? Because if that's the case, too bad.
I guess also just coming from the work environment that we had previously, where if you work for, you know, say you work 12 hours for 2 days straight, and then that third day you just don't do anything at all, it's perfectly fine. It's not a big deal. So
I
it's like it's something to it's a hard adjustment to make when you've had so much autonomy over what hours you work, when you work them. If you want to go in at 12 midnight, that's perfectly fine. Nobody cares as long as you get the work done.
Yeah, I think in those terms, grad school was so awesome. I just
Yeah.
loved it for the fact that it gave me autonomy over my time and just work whenever I wanted to work. So good,
Yeah, exactly.
good in that case. Otherwise, the pressure is just too much.
Yeah. Yes, I agree 100%. I kind of I miss it sometimes, but then I also like having the structure of knowing like I just need to work my 7 hours today, and then after that, I can go home and just relax.
Right.
I've been like going back and forth with that idea of switching back and forth between having that structure or getting a new job title and having the more flexibility of, you know, being able to just come in and do work whenever.
I think I like my flexibility. I would rather prefer that um, other than have like somebody on my head saying, "Why didn't you come to work at 8:30 a.m.?" I'm like, as long as I'm getting my work done, chill.
Hmm. Hmm.
I can't deal with like micromanagers or somebody saying like you. I don't know. Is it the like the rebel in me since my childhood that oh if you're asking me to really come at 7 a.m. then I'm not coming at 7 a.m.
It's like
Like
now I'm going to come at 8.
yes, it's like don't tell me that you have to do it.
Hmm.
I'm like I don't want to have to do it. I would want to do
Hmm.
it, you know. So I don't know. It's just it's just me. It's just my mind. But anyway,
All right, guys. So that concludes today's episode. Make sure you let us know some of your red and green flags at work, something that you may experience in the comments down below. Give us a like, share, subscribe, do all of the things to show us that you are in support of the podcast. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
bye.